Well, first of all, there's a reason why we make the distinction to have male athletics versus female athletics. The reason is that males have a physiological advantage over women.
As far as trans athletes go, we could sit here and talk for 3 hours about like all the different ways that hormones might affect your body and might not affect your body.
All right, we're going to start with Joe Rogan's side of the argument, then we'll go over to Adam Conover's. But before we do, I want to know, what do you think about this specific topic? Let me know in the comments below. Do you think that people who change their sex should be able to compete with their newly identified sex in sports? So for instance, if a guy does whatever you have to do to be considered transitioned to a girl, should they then be able to fight women in MMA? And before we start and listen to what Joe's side of this is, I want to let you know, this is one of the most ridiculous debates, if you'd even call it that I've ever broken down. One person uses facts to argue their side, and the other person just uses pure idealism in the way that he kind of wishes it could be. And that's all I'll say. I'll let you decide who's who. So here's Rogan's thoughts on it.
My point of view is that there's a reason why we make the distinction to have male athletics versus female athletics. The reason is that males have a physiological advantage over women. So in most sports, most physical sports, we do not have males compete with females. The question becomes, when someone who is male transitions and becomes female, do those same physiological advantages apply? And what is the evidence? Well, the evidence in competition seems to be that it shows that it does apply, particularly in weightlifting, rugby, mountain biking, power heavy sports that favor larger people, stronger bodies. Males that transition to females have a significant advantage in their breaking world records.
So before we get too deep in this, I do want to point out that this video is to focus on the social interaction between these two. I don't want you to get too hung up on your views on which side is right or wrong. There's a lot of different videos that analyze that. I'm interested in the social interaction so you can learn from what these guys are doing right or wrong and use it in your own life.
So if you're a woman and you're a natural woman and you don't take any extra hormones or male hormones, you're not taking steroids or any sort of performance-enhancing drugs, you're doing your very best to compete and you're at the top of the heap. But then someone comes along that was a man for 30 years and decides that they're going to be a woman, and this has happened, and literally transitioned a few months ago and competes as a woman and destroys records and dominates you in that sport. That's bullshit. And that's not competing on a level playing field.
And the thing about this you'll notice is Rogan usually is so calm in his discussion. A lot of people always think, oh, he looks like he's high. But in this, you can see he's really trying to keep cool because it's such a hot button issue for him, because he announces a lot of the MMA and UFC fights. And he saw this happen when a man who had transitioned to be a woman fought in the woman's category and just dominated the person. I mean, it looked just like a guy fighting a woman, and he doesn't want that, right? He cares about the sport. He wants it to be a good, fair fight. So he's clearly passionate about this. So it's interesting to see a guy like Rogan, who's usually so calm and cool to the point that people think he's high, get really worked up and try to restrain himself.
That's a person who's biologically a male and who is a male for 30 plus years of having testosterone run through their body and affect their tendon strength and affect the shape of their bones and the mechanical advantages of the male hips versus the female hips. And then they're competing with smaller people who have been a woman their whole life. It's not fair. It's as much cheating as taking steroids when the other person doesn't, or taking performance-enhancing drugs when the other person doesn't. Maybe even more so. Maybe even more so because you also have there's a bunch of advantages in terms of reaction time that males enjoy. It's some significant difference in reaction time between males and even untrained males versus female professional athletes.
Well, I disagree, and
what do you disagree about?
See, now that's Rogan's strength there. He says, I disagree, and so Rogan knows he's pulled from thoughts and actual experience of things that's happened. So he asks for clarity. Well, what do you disagree on? There's nothing you can really disagree on unless you're not going to use facts to disagree. So let's see if Adam does use facts. There's no way he can. So let's see what he says.
My main point being the one that I already made, right? That I don't think that there is such a thing as a perfectly level playing field. I think we decide what kind of playing field we want to have.
Sure, but we do make the distinction where we don't allow men to compete in women's divisions.
And I think that distinction may be breaking down a bit, right? And I think it may be time to break down that.
So the distinction of men and women is breaking down, is what he's saying.
Distinction a little
so
bit.
you think that males should be able to compete in the women's division of weightlifting?
No, I don't necessarily.
But they can if they transition.
Well, first of all, there's a
Do you notice any stuttering? This reminds me when we broke down that the Dorsey, the Twitter, and his attorney. When people don't have a good answer and they're buying time, you notice a stutter. So I mean, listen to him trying to come up with an idea here.
Well, first of all, there's a lot of stuff to break down, right? And I'm not an expert on the subject.
And also another thing. How many times has he said, "Oh, I'm not an expert on this. I don't really know how hormones work. I don't really know about it, but it's the way I like it. It's the sport that I would like to watch." So listen to this thing right here.
And I'm not an expert on that, and I don't want to claim to be, right? But a sports with trans athletes who are competing with with their gender, right? That is a sporting world that I'm more interested in, right? And I think we should find a way to make that happen.
This is really the most ridiculous line of the whole debate. Is he basically says he thinks that people who transition should be able to compete in it because that's the world of sports that he's more interested in watching. So we should work towards that.
That is a sporting world that I'm more interested in, right? And I think we should find a way to make that happen.
That's his argument. Can you imagine? Like, the thing that bothers me about this is this guy has a big show, and people who have platforms have influence just because they have ears, and it shapes people's perspective on things. So when you have people who admittedly know nothing about this, he said so many times in this interview he doesn't know anything about this, but because he wishes that's the way it should be, he's trying to tell people that's the way it should be, even though there's no fact behind it. That's like all of a sudden the president saying, "Oh, dude, I wish that everyone every day of the year could go to Disneyland for free. That's the world that I'd like to live in." Well, great, but that's irresponsible to use a platform to try to convince people that's the way something should be when it's completely not based on fact, right? What Disney would go under in a month if that was the case. But it's the way I'd like it to be. I just feel like I don't know anything about this guy. I've actually never seen his show. I've seen his face on billboards and stuff when I was in LA before. But I just think that's a completely irresponsible thing to do. And from a social perspective, what we've seen in this is Joe Rogan just dominates the whole thing. Why? Because he's using fact and experience versus a guy who's just using the way he wants it to be. So it's impossible to debate against someone who knows anything about debate when one person uses fact and the other person uses feel.
Right. So it's just sort of off the top of my head. One thing is, you're postulating a particular person who decided to transition at the age of 30, right? Mm-hmm. And they were very big and strong before, right? And they decided to transition. Now, that is a type of person that exists, right? I think over the next certainly 30 years, we're going to see, now that people are starting to understand that being trans is just a way that people are, right? They're just people who are trans, and this is something that we're going to accept and support, right? You're seeing folks transition much earlier age,
and so if
and there's Rogan, like, he never talks over people either, but he has so many thoughts on this, and he probably has good valid points to bring up that he even has to cut himself off in this instance. You don't see that often with him.
I have a friend who has a trans kid. Don't know the kid's exact age, but we're in the age range that we're talking about. And he's explained that, like, well, my child from a very young age consistently said, "I am a girl." And has never contradicted themselves, never changed their mind. And so the humane thing and the thing that he felt was good to do as a parent was to embrace that choice on his child's part, right? And yeah, that's
embrace that choice, meaning hormonally.
I shouldn't even phrase it as a choice, like embrace that identity.
But it is a choice, right? I mean, if you're choosing to add hormones to a child's body, that's a choice.
It's a choice
blockers.
It's a choice on the part of the parent. It's not a choice on the part of the child to in the same way that being gay isn't a choice. Yeah.
So now he's just drawing a correlation between two things that don't make sense. He's saying the kid doesn't have a choice in being gay. Therefore, they don't have a choice if they start taking hormones to support the sex that they feel like they are. That's not, I don't even know how you come back with an argument from that. It just doesn't even make sense.
Okay, but if that's who they are, if they think that they're a girl, why do you have to give them hormones to make them more of a girl?
Because I'm sorry, can you expand on the question?
I'm actually just watching this now. Can you explain the question? How hard is that to understand? Rogan says, if there's someone who thinks they feel like a girl, why do they have to have more hormones to feel a girl? And what is he doing? It's classic, just buying time. Can you explain the question? The funny thing is, usually when people use that tactic, they're asking for more clarity on a question that's a little more complicated. But this question is as straightforward as it gets.
It's a simple question. If you say that the child thinks it's a girl, so you're going to give the child hormones.
Mm-hmm.
If the child thinks it's a girl, let it be a girl. Like, you don't have, why are you adding hormones? If you're shooting hormones into a child and you're affecting the child's development, you're saying that's not a choice. That's nonsense. Of course it's a choice. You're choosing to chemically change this child's body.
Do gender confirmation via hormones. And
you know that doesn't affect the suicide rate. The suicide rate for trans people is very high, post-op and pre-op. Really doesn't get affected by whether or not you treat them.
Well, the operation,
the question
one
could be,
misconception is,
why is that? Is that because they're not accepted by society and we're not more loving? Could it be underlying issues that are causing them to feel this way in the first place? Like, what is it? We don't know, and I'm sure it varies widely.
Look, so all I can do is defer to the experts that I know about this, right? So
another example of him saying, I don't know much about it, I'm deferring to other people. Which is fine. It's good to defer to experts, but let's hear what these experts say.
For instance, there's an author named Bryn Tannehill, who's a former military helicopter pilot. I just interviewed her for my new podcast that's coming out soon called Factually. I'm doing it on Earwolf, and it's like a long-form interview podcast. And so she's one of the people who's affected by the Trump military ban on trans service people. So that's why we brought her on.
Because she's trans.
Because she's trans, yeah.
So basically, I don't even know what he said that expert said. He said, I have to defer to the experts, and one expert I defer to is this person, and here's their story, but it doesn't even talk to the point about suicide rates.
My concern is not with young adults deciding to take steps to confirm their gender identity, who they feel they really are. I'm all for you doing whatever you want to do when you're an adult, when your mind is formed. But people change their mind. They change their opinion. They change their thoughts. There's nothing wrong with just deciding to be a gay man. There's nothing wrong with your body, as you grow and mature and develop, you growing out of these ideas. Some will and some won't.
Now, one of the things I'll point out here is both of them are doing a good job not getting nasty with the other person. Because if one person got super defensive, like the Adam guy is a little more defensive, but he's still keeping somewhat jovial and friendly. And I guess like he just said, he has a podcast, he has a show. So he's good at this. And you can tell people that have experienced things like this, what do they all do? They strive to keep it friendly and social, and they don't get angry. So I'll point out that both of them are doing a good job of that.
The other thing I was going to say is that I do know also among the trans folks that I know, or the trans people who speak about this that I've heard, so many of them say, I wish I had access. I knew this about myself at a very young age, and I wish to God that I had had the ability to receive these hormones at a young age. My life would be so much better. And
so one of the things you notice here is the argument, that's probably the best argument that he's made so far. He's actually referring to people who are looking back and saying, I wish I had this. But that's not at all what this initial question was. It was, should trans people be able to compete with their new sex? And so now he's backpedaled all the way to, well, yeah, it would be nice if people who wanted to transition could do it younger. I don't really have many thoughts on that, but I do think it's a totally different question than what was posed before. So that's typically what people do when they can't justify or come up with a good answer for their original point. They back off the topic until they found the lowest common denominator that they actually do feel confident in defending, which in this case is this specific topic.
I'm not going to argue with those folks.
I wouldn't argue with those folks either, but you have to address the fact that there are people that have gone through transition surgery and said, I wish to God that I never did this.
I do think that when we're talking about an issue that affects those people, right? The first thing we should do is listen to those people, right?
Listen to the children.
Listen to the children and listen to the adults, right? Who said, I used to be that child.
Okay.
You know,
but they are not that child. And, to you say, look, everyone's different. So for them to say, I was that child, that's nonsense.
Rogan's getting heated up here. And have you noticed this entire interview? Rogan hasn't not only laughed, but he hasn't smiled once. This is clearly such a hot button issue for him. And I want to remind you, this video is not to pick sides on this debate, right? It's interesting in the comments to talk about that, but this comment is to break down socially what's going on between them so you can understand what's going on. So when you find yourself in a debate like this, a hot, intense debate, you can go over some of the things you said. Hey, keep cool, keep jovial, be nice and easy. Now, one thing I think Rogan could do, he's usually very good at this, but he should realize that he's really worked up and stressed and try to throw in a laugh and a smile every now and then, because the Adam guy is. And I think that would kind of lighten the load just to show that he's not trying to be the guy like, you're wrong, this, and this. That's one thing that I would suggest.
Sure, but we don't have either of those folks in the room.
Right, but we have to acknowledge that they're real as well.
Yeah, I don't. I'm not dismissing that those people are real.
Right, but when we say if you talk to trans folks, you get this impression, that's not necessarily true. You get a wide range of impressions.
Rogan's not letting him slide with that comment.
I wasn't talking about specifically the impression that I wasn't saying we should reason from anecdotal evidence, right? I'm saying that.
Right now, this guy wishes the interview's over. And Rogan, even though he's being kind of tough on him by holding his feet to the fire and not letting questions slide that this guy doesn't have answers to, he's still being civil. What if Rogan said, listen, dude, you clearly have no idea what you're talking about. Why don't you just get your pudgy belly out of here? What would he say? That's something that's totally different, right? Being able to reply to somebody who makes fun of you or talks down to you is a different skill. That's not necessary in dealing with a guy like Rogan. But let me ask you, maybe at the workplace or maybe your friends, people kind of talk down to you or they make fun of you or they just kind of slight you to kind of reduce your social status and boost their social status. It doesn't look good. It doesn't feel good. When you know that you don't have anything to say when someone says that, it can kind of lower your confidence. This video isn't about that, but if you want to watch a video where I talk to you about exactly what you can do to have a sharp and witty comeback when people come down on you, you can click right here and watch it now. And if you haven't seen that video of Rogan going after Twitter and their attorney, that's a really good one too. You can click here to watch the video about quick and witty comebacks or click here and watch the Rogan Twitter video. I'll talk to you there.